Welcome to Geared for Growth. I'm your host, Mike Mortlock from MCG Quantity Surveyors. And today I'm joined by Brooke Juracic. And this is a really practical conversation about money, lending, and the mistakes people don't realise they're making. We unpack what's happening in the SMSF space right now and why it's not the shortcut to property investing that it's often made out to be. Brooke shares the red flags she sees every day, from people forcing deals to work to low buffers, poor structure, and emotional decision-making in lending. We also get into some of the real horror stories around lending, including how simple things like online calculators can damage your credit score without you even realizing it. There's a strong theme throughout this episode and around financial literacy, especially for younger investors, and why structure and long-term thinking matter more than ever in this market. If you're serious about building a portfolio and avoiding costly mistakes, this one's worth your time. Let's get into it. Brooke Juracic, thanks for joining me on Geared for Growth.
Thank you for having me. Nice to be here.
I've been looking forward to this episode because we've got a fair bit to unpack. But for people that maybe haven't come across you before, could you let us know who you are, your area of expertise?
Yeah, so I am a residential mortgage broking company. We also specialise in self-managed super fund lending, commercial and development projects. We believe in more of a structured lending approach with a main focus on debt reduction strategies to help our clients essentially get out of debt faster and grow their portfolios in a managed and structured way.
Excellent. Well, I feel like we've got the right person to talk to at the moment. And, you know, there's a lot more to what you do than just mortgage broking, right? You're actually quite a specialist. And one of those specialties is in the SMSF space, which has been getting quite a bit of press in the last little while. I'm interested in what's happening on the ground, and are more people genuinely suited to buying property in super, or do we see the spruikers just looking for another pot of cash where they can perhaps apply their wares and buy them a property?
Yeah, so there's definitely more noise around that SMSF property market right now. So for people who aren't really aware what an SMSF is, it's a self-managed super fund. There's a lot of compliance, obviously, around setting one of those up and actually using them to invest in property. So it's not as simple as a standard investment as some people actually believe. The right clients are using them for long-term wealth plays, and that is what the SMSF investing game is for. It's not a short-term trend following investment. It's a long-term retirement goal and plan. So there's no real shortcut in an SMSF. It's really complex and structured, which is why putting together a team of professionals like a financial planner, a financial advisor, an accountant who specializes in the self-managed super fund space, and a broker who also specializes. And the key word there is specializing in them, because anyone can write a SMSF loan or put it together, but having the specialists behind you is what is actually going to make things more successful long term.
And I was at a Pippa event just last week, and we had we had Phil Anderson, who's the head of the sort of the organisation for financial planners, for want of a better term. He basically said that buying a property in self-managed super fund is not actually a recommendation that a buyer's agent, for example, could make. And I feel like we're seeing a lot of that happening with social media and those sorts of things. Like, what's your kind of read on the situation? Are people shoving their toe across the line of where they should be actually sort of staying in their lane?
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard because it's sort of, a discussion between property and finance. So you do get buyer's agents who are talking about the investment itself and not really comprehending or understanding the complexity and compliance requirements around the SMSF itself as well. So it gets a little bit grey when property buyers are essentially influencing whether someone should use their super, or discussing that property and positioning them into something that they think would be beneficial in a super without actually understanding the back end requirements and compliance and liquidity that is needed for those. The old adage of, let's negatively gear investment properties to minimize tax and minimize, outlays and whatnot. But that's actually not a smart strategy in an SMSF, because obviously you want your super to grow for retirement. So if you're depleting that with a negatively geared property, that's just firstly non-compliant in the SIS Act, but also detrimental to your long-term retirement goals. So finding those buyers agents to balance on the aspect of providing structured property advice and trying not to get too involved in that financial aspect of it in the sense of returns, cash flow, negative gearing, and all the rest of it. That's where they need to sort of stay in their lane in that SMSF space.
I suppose with property investors, we can be a fairly energetic and enthusiastic bunch. It's more. We want to grow the portfolio. And there'll be people that sort of don't necessarily realise at first glance that their super fund is a potential pot of cash for them to be able to expand their portfolio. When people come to you, like, what are some of the red flags where you're kind of thinking, gosh, this is actually a high risk situation with your balance, or you haven't really thought about the strategy?
Yeah, one of the biggest red flags is when you've just got a client or a referrer just trying to make the numbers work and force it into a spot just because it seems like a good deal rather than actually having that client be in a position to be able to do it. The low balances with no buffer and no liquidity after a purchase is also one of the major red flags for me, because most people don't actually understand that there are a lot of ongoing costs that are more expensive than a standard super investment fund with a self-managed super fund. And the emotional aspect, that's also another red flag for me. If someone's emotionally invested too much into a property that they're going to be looking at putting into a self-managed super fund, that's also something that really makes me sit there and go, is this actually a good decision for you? Or are you just really in love with the property and you just are trying to find any way to make it work? So
In terms of working, and I suppose the counterpoint not working, what have you seen? Because of course, you know, working in that space and being a specialist with SMSF lending amongst other things like development, what have you seen where people have done really well and other times where it just should never have started from the beginning?
Yeah, so when things work really well, it's obviously usually very intentional. So the client has the right capacity, the right patience, and they're just enough emotional intelligence to be invested in a investment deal or a development project, but also still having it at arm's length enough so that if something does go wrong or we have to pivot or you have to change strategies, that it's not the end of the world. And buying an asset that they're going to be comfortable with holding long term. When it doesn't work is when people are really focusing on that, like I said, emotional aspect. They're just wanting to expand that portfolio. They're just trying to grab anything that they can afford. They're not really focusing on long-term strategies and cash flow options, or they just aren't really partnering with the right people that are going to help support future projects and future growth rather than focusing on the individual scenario. Most people really focus on those individual scenarios and just saying, well, that's the one I want right now. I'll worry about the next one later. That's where I find most people are starting to have problems, especially with the prices and rates and everything changing again. Having a long-term structure with somebody is far more beneficial than just winging every transaction.
Oh, gosh, you really take the fun out of things. We've got to have a long-term strategy. We can't wing things. Oh, man. Look, I know I'm being silly. I know you're very passionate about education and financial literacy, especially with young people and helping first home buyers and those sorts of things. Let's get to this sort of new sort of Daily Mail-esque segment of this episode, and that's the horror stories, because I suppose for a lot of people, you kind of need a little bit of Operation Shock and Awe to make them realise, well, this is actually serious. You do need strategy, and winging it is not a good approach.
Yeah, so most of the horror stories that I'm sort of seeing at the moment are people who didn't understand the loan that they were getting to start with, or people who haven't even looked at their loan in several years or whatnot, not knowing what the costs actually are, not knowing what an exit cost is going to be if they decide to, fix their rate early and then sell and adjust their property and loans and whatnot. There's thousands of dollars in fees that could be charged for somebody like that if they're not structuring their lending correctly. So more often than not, also a lot of horror stories that I face are people who have shopped around and done their own, online lending options and whatnot without actually realizing that every time they do one of those lender calculators on how much can I borrow, certain ones actually are a submission and hit your credit file. So I had a poor client recently who didn't realize they tanked their credit score from 900 down to 300. And now we can't really do anything in the standard consumer space because they just made multiple inquiries with different online banks that they weren't really aware was actually going to affect them moving forward. So that's one of my biggest horror stories at the moment, is just lack of financial interest.
A lot of people, I think, wouldn't realise that. And I'm guessing with those calculators, there is a little bit of a sort of almost like a PDS or a disclaimer, but presumably nobody reads those, right?
Yeah, 100%. There's normally just like a little, see how much you can borrow. And then there's this really small text that probably outlines that this is technically classed as a submission or go on your file. But like you said, nobody sits there and reads the, size 8 text that's on the bottom of a little fragment of a web page.
Yeah, gee, that's a big one that I think would catch a lot of people out. You mentioned, the fixing of rates, and this can be a bit of a double-edged sword. And I suppose now we're in a situation where we've had our 25 basis points rise. There's, I think, interest rate increases have been downgraded a little bit because of the fuel costs that are hitting household budgets. Then the banks are sort of thinking that will have people moderate their spending a little bit, but it still does look more likely than not we will see interest rate rises in the back end of the year. It's probably a great time to talk about some of those, I suppose the double-edged sword of anyone that's wanting to fix their rates because they can see the writing on the wall, but they might be an investor and they might have a time frame where they're looking to dispose of that asset or borrow against it. What do people need to know?
So the main thing people would need to know is if they're looking at wanting to fix a rate, obviously speak to a broker or your local branch if that's how you do your mortgaging. Basically just outline all the costs associated and know your options. You don't actually have to put the entire amount into a fixed rate as well. You can split the loan up and have a small portion fixed and a larger portion variable, so you're maximizing offset accounts and whatnot. And then also keeping in mind that the fixed portion will have its certain fees. So map out the plan first on how long they're thinking of wanting to keep the properties and what their actual strategy for their long-term investment is, or owner occupier, how long they're willing to stay in that place. If they're thinking are in the next 12 months, then maybe a 12-month fixed rate is essentially where you're going to be most beneficial to stave off some of those rate rises that are expected at the later end of this year, but also keeping the budget sort of in check and knowing things, but also the potential of doing that, like I said, that split and having a portion of each, so that in case they do drop or hold or don't go anywhere else, you still haven't really lost that advantage on that side either.
I like that. And we've hit upon another, we've reiterated a similar theme, and that's plan ahead, don't wing it. Speaking of planning ahead, rent vesting is something that a lot of property investors have sort of realised, look, I can get all of my eggs in one basket and buy my principal place of residence early, or I can perhaps put that off and maybe get into a property sooner. And there's some fairly strong arguments to say buying something last year or the year before or a few years before that, rather than having to wait on the sidelines, would have been a far better decision. But It's not a panacea. And, property investors want the hotspots, but I like to think they come here for the truth. So what is the truth about property investing, rent vesting, that you think people need to know?
Yeah, so rent vesting is essentially a great option, for people who can't necessarily afford to buy where they're really wanting, but they can afford the potential rent that is there, but still also not missing out on getting into that market, because the market has been so unpredictable to a degree since COVID started that everyone thought there was going to be a property crash. They're now talking potential recessions and, property crashes again. But I honestly can't comment on any of that because it's just so unpredictable. You don't know what's going. So just getting in is the benefit of rent vesting. But people do need to remember the trade-offs, that your rent still impacts your borrowing capacity. So even if you're wanting to buy in a certain place, but you can't afford, the owner-occupier mortgage there, but the rent there is high yielding, you need to make sure that your rent that you're paying is not mitigating the rent that you're receiving. So it just is a double negative. So it works really well, again, when it's structured properly. I think you're working out a theme. I like structure and routine and things like that, but it needs to be a deliberate strategy and just not a convenient one. It needs to really suit everything that you're looking for.
Now, I prefaced a bit earlier in the episode about your passion for financial literacy. I wouldn't mind spending a few minutes on that, and perhaps starting with where are we at now? What do you see as the gaps? And we can have all sorts of arguments about how hard it is to buy now compared to 20, 30 years ago, and I suppose that feeds itself into the preamble to the May budget, where they're looking at CGT and negative gearing, saying, previous generations are sailing off into the sunset with huge super balances, and young people are likely to pay more tax than any generation in history. What's your read of the situation at the moment?
The Geared for Growth Property Investing podcast is presented by our business, MCG Quantity Surveyors. If you're an investor or a property professional looking to get the best tax depreciation deductions for yourself or your clients, please get in touch with us at mcgqs.com.au. It's our mission to help as many property investors as we can to maximise their claims and maximise their property education as well.
It's really hard my personal opinion is that it is really hard for young people to get into the market. Not only is it hard in the aspect of prices are through the roof, the incomes are not matching the inflation of properties, and it's not just about sacrificing eating out and your smashed avos and all the rest of it that our grandparents kindly like to remind us that if we just stopped eating out and buying coffees, then we'd be able to afford a property. There's so much more that's going on in that aspect as well, because by the time they save enough just to get into that 5% market to even use any of the schemes that are available, the prices have increased yet again, and their savings have to go up again, and they're missing out again. So take the latest scheme that got updated in October. They were expecting all these first home buyers to flood into the market because of the ability to increase the cap up to $1 million in certain places and over $1 million in places like Sydney and Melbourne. But all that did was just drive up prices of property. It increased 10% or something after November and December. And you're just sitting there going, we're trying to help them get in, but then it's just continuous competition. So just as they thought they could get in, prices have gone up again, and now they're in the same position. So it's so much harder to get in these days. I really do believe that than it was in our parents' generation or even their parents' generation, definitely.
And with that information, knowing that it is harder, and I think we can look at objective measures of household income to asset price being, 3 or 4x, some multiple decades ago, to now approaching 6 and 7x in certain cities. If you had somebody that was clever enough to go, look, it's going to be tough, so I need to be decisive from an early age, let's say, mid to late teenager that has aspirations for owning their own property, what would be the big things that you would want to drill into them?
Just essentially the basic understanding on financial literacy is really important, and having money work for you, not you working for money. So outlining to everybody that having a budget is not actually, it doesn't have to be this restrictive measure. It actually just can be something that keeps you on track to help you meet your goals and aspirations within your financial goals. It is something that can help you just reorganize where your money is going. If you sort of get your pay slip and you don't know where it is in the next 3 days, you get paid weekly and you're continuously living paycheck to paycheck, and you're just not understanding where it's going. Teaching people how to understand, what portion of a payslip is tax, what portion is super, what the little line that says help is for. People don't even, most of my clients that are younger don't even understand their own pay slips. So just really teaching them how to use their money for them and what a good debt is versus what a bad debt is. Like that car loan that they're getting is a bad debt because it's a depreciating asset and it's going to cost you, so much more in interest than what you've bought it for. So everyone's like, oh, it's just a $30,000 car loan. That's so fine. That's what the car's going to cost me. And then I'm going to sell it. But you seem to forget that 30,000 over 5 years has got like 15 to 20 grand's worth of interest. So it's not a $30,000 car. You've got a $45,000 to $50,000 car and you've overpaid. And now your car's only worth 15 grand when you sell it. So it's those kind of financial decisions to help them understand young and early that the buy now, pay later adage and environment that we're in right now is just, it's not good. Replacing everything every time something breaks or scratches or the newer model comes out every 18 months, that's also not good. Like this quickly replacing society that we're in is just not helpful to the younger generation in actually getting anywhere in property or investing or even just saving.
I remember last time I was in your neck of the woods, I went to a liquor store, obviously on brand. That's not the story. But I said I had a chat to the guy behind the counter. I said, "How's your day?" And he looked beaten, and I sort of said, "What's going on?" He said, "Oh, there's just some young girls that came in and said, like, can we put this on Afterpay?" And I don't think it was the fact that they didn't have that facility available. He was just kind of, musing on how did society get to this point where, like, there's discretionable items and then there's alcohol, which is like just an immediately consumable discretionary spend. And I suppose, like, it really sort of struck him, like, that society has got to this point where it's like, I want what I want now and I'll deal with the stuff later on. I think a lot of people criticize millennials for having those attitudes, but these things didn't exist when I was, a late teen. Like, how much of it do you think is around the literacy? How much do you think society has changed that has actually made it a lot harder? I mean, there weren't iPhones when I was a teenager, just as an example.
Yeah, I think society is probably, I'd like to say at least 70% of the cause because, like you said, we're in this age of buy now, pay later, instant gratification, and all these young kids who just live on their iPhones and compare with each other all day, every day. So-and-so's on another holiday. That person's got another new outfit for a party. How much marketing is through paid advertising on, Instagram, Facebook, Snapchat now. Like it's out of control how much in your face it is to just buy now, pay later, buy now, pay later. And really double down and enforces in these kids, oh, don't worry about it. That's what a line of credit for. Don't worry about it. You can just pay it off in 4 easy installments. But they're really it's really detrimental to their longevity in their financial life cycle because it just stunts them at their growth at that point. At 15 and 16, if they start with the buy now and pay laters, if they start in that, instant gratification, I'll get a credit card and I'll worry about it later attitude, it's so hard to break out of that as a young adult once you get to that mid-20, early 30, where you're looking at wanting to have a property because all your friends have one. It's so much harder to break it then. So I'd say 70% of society is its problem, but also that 30% of education that is definitely required for them to at least understand it. It's not the matter of don't have these buy now and pay laters. It's do it properly. Like if you need to do that, because like I loved lay-by. Like I love lay-by. My mum used to put all our Christmas presents on lay-by and she'd take the whole year to pay it off rather than a lump sum. And that's great. Like, but it also, I still go back and use lay-by for my daughter now because I have a few things that I like to get her every year. We buy it and put it out over the whole entire year instead of doing one lump sum. Then I freak out that I don't have the savings or I don't have the money for this. And now I've got to string along to the next paycheck until, I get some more. It's those type of buy now, pay later facilities are great for budgeting and managing your cash flow, but doing it just for the sake of doing it, like alcohol. If you don't have $20 to buy a 4-pack, don't buy the 4-pack.
What a defeatist attitude, Brooke. You're too sensible.
Look, to be fair, I really wasn't. I have lived the life that I am now teaching people to avoid. I lived paycheck to paycheck. I never had any savings. I would blow it all if I ever got like a nice little chunk of something. Like I was the person I now preach to. So it's
Good.
kind of lived it. Yeah, lived it, learnt, and want people not to have to deal with that anymore.
Now we know at least once back in time you were pretty cool. But I mean, what's cool? Having all of the stuff now or having freedom later on? And it sort of begs the question, obviously you mentioned your daughter, and there'll be lots of people that come out of school and kind of think like, I'm 30 years old, I didn't use Pythagorean theorem once. Like I wish I'd actually been taught, like you sort of said, how much of your paycheck is tax, how much of it is super. I remember in primary school, I found out my father was on, I think, $52,000 a year. And I'm like, oh, that means he gets $1,000 a week. Like, why aren't we rich? And I couldn't quite figure it out. And of course, I was never actually taught the answer to that in school. Yeah. It was just through osmosis. So, like, do you feel like, given the situation that we're in where housing is far more difficult than it was, the government are doing their ham-fisted things that normally speak to the demand side. They're failing on the supply, so prices just continue to get higher. Do you feel like the education system has really got to enter the chat?
Definitely. I definitely think the education system needs to join the party in the form of either an extracurricular class in high schools for, grades 10 through 12, the ones that are entering the workforce, even grade 9 through 12, the ones that are entering the workforce, learning about what it means to save. I mean, you can do it as young as, like, we've been teaching our daughter since she was 2. She's 3.5 now, and she's got her 2 piggy banks. One's for saving and one's for spending. And she gets the option every year at her birthday to either spend her spending piggy bank and buy herself a present, or, keep it for next time if she wants to, or do whatever she wants with it throughout the year. But the education aspect of it really does need to be there sooner rather than later, because it's just sad to see so many young children not have the opportunities to even just understand what they're going to be facing outside. Like I did all the maths B and, science and all the rest of it. And I never went to uni, and here I am running my own business in finance because I was good at numbers, but I've never used algebra. I've never used anything that I learned in high school. The things that I wish that I'd learned in high school were all of the things that I'm trying to get people to teach in high school now. Like I said, understanding the pay slip, what a salary sacrifice is, what, interest is, good debt and bad debt, and why credit cards aren't your friend, even if they have points.
Well, if you've got a young person at home or somebody in your sphere and you're listening to this, Brooke is a good person to follow there. But there's quite a lot of sort of influences in that space these days as well, right? I mean, you got to be careful where you get your advice from, but I feel like the information is out there, right?
Yeah, definitely. There is definitely more information becoming available for people. Like you said, you just have to be very careful on who you're listening to and who you're following, because sometimes all the influencers, as good as they mean, they don't have all of the information. They're just giving the catchy snippets that are going to get your attention to help boost their following and, boost their performance and income and all the rest of it. So actually following someone who is, actively in the industry, as well as giving the financial literacy information and not advice is really important to make sure you're following that correctly. Or, look at multiple sources, compare everybody's information. Don't just take one as gospel. There's so much out there that you can look at, read some books, go online, do some tutorials. There's so much information out there for everybody these days that you don't just have to pick one and stop.
Excellent. One thing I wanted to pick your brain about, because of course you work in the development finance space, it did sort of seem like 10 years ago, everyone would go, okay, well, I'm building a couple of properties, and once I can get my portfolio to 2 or 3 or 6, then I want to move into development. That seems to be was the natural kind of progression for people. And I can remember talking to people just to say, like, that increases the risk, and just, if it ain't broke, don't fix it sort of thing. It seems like the development stuff has fallen off to some degree, and people have maybe now replaced that with commercial when they're chasing the higher yields. Have you observed anything like that? And if you have, what do you think we can put that down to?
Yeah, so my observations on the development side of things is the larger developments are obviously starting to be more and more taken over by the larger groups. And by larger developments, I mean like 10 plus, sites for homes or townhouses or things like that. I'm actually really starting to see a lot of mum and dad investors coming into play at the moment, doing small little subdivisions on their family properties that they have that are 700 or 800 square meters, has one old house on the other side. So they're subdividing and plonking a new one on the other side and selling and making a quick turnaround on a good investment. That's where I'm sort of seeing the development game pivot at the moment, is the first timing mum and dad type subdividing into, duplex type developments at the moment, because also there's not a lot of land. There's not really a lot of land that's available. But yes, and there's also that sort of lean into the commercial aspect of it as well, with the high yields and whatnot. But I'm seeing that slow down a little bit as well at the moment because of the prices. The prices are just sky high too at the moment in the commercial market, and it's mitigating a lot of those high yielding returns. Most people are needing to now cross collateralize their owner occupier properties into these transactions, just to make them work, which is not obviously a structure that I am happy to do. So it's just becoming a little bit more risk adverse. And I think that just comes down to lack of supply in the market on the residential side of things. So people are trying to dabble in areas that they would normally not dabble because they don't have the knowledge or experience.
That's a good observation. And I think with listings, we're about half of the 5-year average in terms of available stock. So that's a whole nother episode in itself. But for people that are interested in investing and putting some positive steps in 2026 towards their financial goals, in closing, what do you think are some of the most important areas of focus for people?
Probably the most important areas of focus I would outline would be for clients and potential investors to really do actual research and to really focus on having those connections with professionals like buyers agents, solicitors and everything up front, so that you can discuss the opportunities with them before you go in and just fall in love and put an offer on it that you can't afford. Step one is always finance first, property second. Just because you can't get a property without finance, and you don't know what kind of property you can have without knowing the finance that you can achieve. So
here's you being sensible again.
Yeah, I know. It's also like use a broker, push for services. But no, I'd love to say just put on a cowboy hat and wing it and throw a lasso somewhere and just see what comes out. But that's just not strategic for long-term growth or any good outcome, really. So it's just making sure to partner with those professionals to make sure you've got the right team and structure moving forward to make the best choices.
Yeah, look, I think that's excellent advice, and I don't know how many episodes we're up to. It's 300 plus, and it's amazing how many of them get back to the boring fundamentals of have a strategy and a plan, and don't cowboy hat and lasso anything. So, Brooke, it's been a real pleasure sticking on that theme and giving us some insights into your little corner of the world as well. So thanks very much.
No, thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.
Cheers.